Hello everyone, and welcome to part 5 of our 4-part series. And I'm laughing because we actually added this session per a request from one of our viewers on the SparkPlug series that we've been doing, where we showed how to design and then toolpath and then collaborate and then finally make. And we did this last week. Hopefully you saw that episode. But somebody said, how did you create that drawing that you used? And so that's what I'm going to be showing today. So as you can see on my screen, I have this drawing, and I'll be the first to admit it might not be the most perfect drawing. I might have left out some dimensions or whatever, so please be kind in the comments about, tolerancing GD&T or whatever. This was more a drawing that I created just so I could show how to model the part in the first episode. So what I'm going to do is give you guys some tips and tricks on how I created this particular drawing. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to jump back to my 3D model here. So this is the design that we came up with for the bottle opener. Oh, and by the way, I want to congratulate the winners. So Aaron, I think, sent out some emails to the people that were randomly selected, so congrats. You guys are gonna get one of these. So if you haven't replied already saying that you won, make sure you reply to him so he knows how to get that to you. Okay, so here's the part we've designed, and now I want to create some documentation of it. And to do that, I'm gonna go into my design tab right here and say drawing from design, and you'll notice that there's actually two different options here. And I think it's in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm actually going to show a live stream on how to create an animation, and I'll also talk about how to create a drawing from an animation, so keep an eye out for that. But in this case, I'm going to say drawing from design, and that's going to bring up our create drawing menu. And the very first option here is full assembly, and by default it's going to be checked. Well, I only have one part in this session basically, so I don't really need to do the full assembly. And you'll notice when I uncheck that, it allows me to select which components I want to create drawings of. So in this case it's going to be a single component, but I could even come in here and select 3 or 4 out of the 10, for example, if I had like an assembly. I'm going to go ahead and leave drawing alone, and I'm going to leave template alone. We do have the ability to create different templates, and I've actually shown these in a previous live stream. But in this case, we're going to just leave it from scratch. I'm going to do ASME inch, and then I'm going to also pick a sheet size. So in this case, I might start out with like a C size sheet. So we're basically saying we want to create a drawing of this spark plug in inches on a C size sheet. So I'll go ahead and say okay. And it's going to take a moment, and it's going to create this title block for me. And you'll notice that it actually fills in the project, the title, who it was drawn by, when it was drawn, how many sheets there are, etc. But you'll also notice that I have a graphical representation of the spark plug kind of attached to my cursor. In my drawing view menu, you see we have lots of options here, and kind of starting from the top down, you can see the orientation by default is set to front, and so it's showing us a front view representation. I could come in here and change that to many different ones. I'm actually going to show you some tips and tricks with this here in a little bit. We'll come back to that. And then it's also allowing us to specify how is this going to be displayed. Well, in this case, I want to do just visible edges. And if you hover over each of these, it tells you what they are. So for example, the second one is visible and hidden edges. Well, because there's a lot of stuff going on with this particular part, I don't want to show hidden edges in this case. I could do shaded and shaded with hidden edges. The next one is scale, and you'll notice it says 1:1, and my image here is kind of small, so I'm going to change this. I'm going to click on this little down arrow, and I'm going to say 2:1. But notice all of the different options you have in here, including like architectural type, 1/8 inch equals a foot, for example. Well, I'm going to say 2 to 1, and instantly we can see that my image got a little bit larger. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and place this view where I want. So I'm just going to go ahead and click. Okay. Now we have this edge visibility, and I'll show you what this is here in just a little bit, but you'll notice it says tangent edges. Do we want them to be full length, shortened, or off? And in this case, we're going to set them to be off for now. And I'm not going to worry about interference edges or thread edges right now, but I wanted to display the thread edges, so I'll go ahead and say OK. And let's take a look at what we got. Okay. So we can see a 2D representation of this view. As I hover over it, you see this blue box, and if I click on that box to pre-select it, I can then right mouse click and we can edit the view. So even though I've placed it, I can come in and say I want to edit this view, and it brings this menu back. So I could change the scale. I could say show, the hidden lines if I wanted to, for example, or make it shaded if I wanted to. But what I wanted to do here was to show this tangent edges. And you'll notice right now they're turned to off. I'm going to go ahead and say full length, and notice what happened right here. I'm going to zoom up so you can kind of see what's going on here. So these are all filleted edges, and so basically where one fillet is tangent to another, it's creating this tangent edge, and that's being displayed. If I turn it off, we just see kind of this side profile. If I say shortened, I'm going to zoom up here a little bit, you can see that it doesn't go all the way to the edge. And this is kind of a cool way to get some really nice looking drawings. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this to be shortened in this case. Okay. So I'll go ahead and hit close, and there we can see basically our base view. So going from left to right, you can see the very first icon was the base view. That's kind of like what you could kind of think of as a parent. And then the rest of them are projected views. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and click on projected view, and it says select the parent view. So we're going to create projections from this view. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and you'll notice as I move around, now it's showing kind of a side view. If I move up, I get a top view. If I move to the left, I get a left view. Okay, and if I move kind of up to the right, I get an isometric representation. And again, depending on which direction I hover, I get different isometric representations. So you can kind of see how that one's kind of looking up from the bottom, whereas this one's kind of looking down from the top, which I kind of like. So I'm going to go ahead and place that view there, and then I'll go ahead and place maybe this view over here. I want kind of that side view. I'm not going to do a top view, so I'm going to go ahead and say enter, or just hit my enter key, and you'll see that it creates those views for us. So we can kind of see the front view, and we can see a side view, and we can see an isometric view. Now I personally like to make my isometric view shaded, so I'm going to go ahead and pre-select it, say edit view. And notice right here, it says scale is 2 to 1 from parent. And what that means is if I were to change the scale of this view, my other views would update automatically and change scale also. I wouldn't have to do one at a time. Over here, we can see the style is from the parent. So whatever style this is whatever style the other views would be. But I'm going to go ahead and override that and say I want my ISO view to be shaded. I'll go ahead and hit close, and we can see, sure enough, it's like a shaded representation, which I think looks really nice. Okay, now I created this drawing to kind of create the cake in the oven, what the final thing is going to look like. So we basically put this view on, we put this view on, and then we put this view. However, I kind of made a mistake. I started out with a C size drawing, and I'm starting to run out of room already. Now I could scale these down, or I could maybe go to a larger sheet size. And I will be honest, I actually didn't know I could do this until I watched Bryce's live stream he did a couple weeks ago about drawings, where he showed that you can actually change your sheet size after the fact. And I've always thought, man, I can't change my sheet size. Well, here's how you do it. Down here in the menu along the bottom, under Sheet Settings, if I click on this little down arrow here, you can see we have some options. Do we want to display the title block or not? Do we want to display the border or not? And then you can also see we can add in a custom title block, or we can come in and change the sheet size. So I'm going to change it from C to D. And now I have a lot more room. And I want to move this isometric view, so I just click on it, and you'll see this little gray box kind of right here in the middle. I'm just going to click on that box and drag it to the right. We do have a move command, which is the exact same thing I just did, but why go to the menu? Just click on your view and drag it to the right, okay? If I click on this view and move up or move to the right, you can kind of see how I'm able to do that. And it's going to keep my other view lined up with it. So kind of because it's a projection, it's keeping that view lined up with it. So let's just go ahead and maybe move this over here somewhere. And let's just call that, I'm going to move it over just a little bit more, maybe something like this. Okay, so we changed our sheet size. I might also want to come in and change some information in my title block. And to do that, all I have to do is double click on the title block, and you'll see kind of this light text appear. And then it says select attribute. So I'm going to go ahead and click on bottle opener, and this is going to allow me to say, for example, SparkPlug bottle opener. Okay. And so I'm able to edit any of these. I could come in here and say, for example, under approved, I could say approved by Aaron on a particular date if I want to. I'm just going to let you guys figure that out, but you can just click on that date. But you can come in and change these if need be. Okay, so that's how you edit your title block. And again, in our previous live stream where I talked about drawings, I show how you can put in a logo in here, how you can create custom title blocks, etc. I'm not going to go into that in this live stream. Okay, so I think the view that has the most people curious is this one over here. How did I go about getting just the profile of the spark plug and make it much larger than the rest? And how did I get all these dimensions on there, etc.? So I don't know if you knew this or not, but you can actually bring sketches into your drawing. And that's exactly what I did here. This is actually a representation of a sketch. So let me show you how you do that. Okay, so you'll notice over here in my browser, we can see we have this plug, and if I expand this open, it shows the body, and you can see the sketches right here. And it's going to list all of the sketches that I have in my 3D model design. Okay. What I'm going to do is basically create another base view. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on base view. I want to do a front representation, but let's make this a little bit larger. Let's go 4:1, for example. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and place that view. I'll say OK, and it's going to create a 2D representation of that view. But notice what it did over here. I now have two of these base views. And so this one, you can kind of see when I hover over it, it's kind of showing the front, the right, and the ISO is all kind of grouped together. But this one's kind of a separate one because we created it as a separate base view. Now what's cool about this, I can expand this guy open. And if I turn off plug, you'll see that it basically, the 3D model is no longer being represented. But I could come in here and turn on my sketch 1, Let me make sure, oops, turn that guy back on. Turn off my bodies. Let me turn off bodies. So make sure that one's active or turned on. I turned off the body. So you'll notice when I have the body displayed, it shows what it looks like. When I turn that off, the body goes away. But now we're displaying this sketch. Okay. Now, because it's a sketch, it's represented with these dashed lines, and you can't change that to be solid lines. They're going to always be dashed, but that's okay for what we're doing here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this border, right-click, and say Edit View. And right now, the scale is 4:1. Well, maybe I want it to be a little bit larger, so I'm not limited to just the numbers that show up in this display right here. I can actually type in my own. So I could come in here and say, for example, let's just say 5:1. Let's do 5.5:1. Not that you might do that, but you can actually type in 5.5:1. But in this case, I'm going to do 5:1 and just scale this view up pretty much as large as I can get it. Okay. So there we go. Now, I might move this view over a little bit. And I'm going to start dimensioning this. So let me go back to my cake in the oven. So you can see we have a bunch of dimensions that go vertical. And they're all lined up with each other, which is really nice looking. And then I have a bunch of horizontal dimensions. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start maybe with these vertical dimensions and show you how you go about doing something like this. Okay. So I might zoom up a little bit here, and we have this dimension menu, and in this dimension menu you can see that we have a command called dimension, and it's actually what we call a smart dimension. It's really powerful. It'll actually do linear, angular, radiuses, diameters, etc., all with one command. So it basically does all of the ones you see right here with one command. And let me show you what I mean by this. Okay, I'm going to pick on this view right here. If I were to put a dimension like that, you can see that's a linear dimension. But if I get near like a radius, you'll see that it's going to do a radius dimension. If I let's do like I don't have a circle here, but let's go ahead and do this guy here, and I can make that a diameter dimension. Okay. It can do angular dimensions. So I could say from that line there to that line there, and you can see it's going to do angular dimensions all with one command. So I'm going to undo all those. Let me get back. Okay. So I use this dimension command quite a bit. In fact, you'll notice the shortcut is D for dimension. So I use that one quite often. Okay. So I'm going to start out by, let's just go ahead and click on this point here. And I'll go ahead and click on this point here. Now watch what happens. As I move, you can see that it says 0.501, and it's kind of at an angle. Well, that kind of makes sense because we started the point here, and then we went to a point that's kind of away from it a little bit. So that's why I put it at an angle. Well, if I just move my mouse up a little bit, you'll see how it actually says, oh, instead of aligned, you want it to be vertical. Or if I move something like this, you'll see it'll actually do horizontal. All, again, with one command. Okay? Now, another thing I've noticed before we move too much further is my text is kind of small. And I like to set my settings before I do a lot of dimensions, so I'm going to escape out of that. And right down here is your dimension or annotation settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And you see it's telling me we're in ASME inches, we're doing third angle projection. I could specify which font do I want to use for my dimensions. I can also specify my text height, and we have 3 different defaults, 0.1, 0.12, and 0.24. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that guy there. And now you'll see that my height is set to 0.24. We also have different linear unit formats. Are they decimal or fractional? So again, depending on what kind of drawing you're doing, you could have it display as decimal, or you could have it display as fractional, like 1/32, for example. Then you also see this linear dimension precision, and we see a bunch of numbers. Now, this one says 0.123. What this is basically showing is it's going to display the numbers out to the third place. So, tens, hundreds, thousands, for example. Okay, so it's basically how many numbers are being displayed after the decimal point. So, for example, if you were at this 0.12 right here, if my dimension was let's just say 0.125, but I was only displaying 2 decimal places, it would show the decimal or the dimension as 0.13 because it would round up that 0.5 up to the 3, right? So that's how you specify the number of decimal places. And then also same thing with angular precision. And then finally, you can see we have display the annotation unit. Do we want to display trailing zeros? So if it was 0.500, do you want it to say 0.5 or do you want it to say 0.500? Okay. And then same thing with leading zeros. Do we want it to say 0.5 or do you want it to just say 0.5? So that's what those options are for. And we'll go ahead and mess with those here in a little bit. So the only thing I did was changed the text height. So I'll go ahead and throw my dimension back on here again, and now we can see the text is a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe just place it right there. Now, I want the rest of these dimensions to be in line with this one. Now, if I were to go ahead and do something like this, I could get fairly close, but I want it to be exact. Okay? So there's a neat trick under dimensions. You can do what's called a chain dimension. So I'm going to click on chain dimension, and in my arrow it says select the base dimension. So I have to have a dimension already to chain off of. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that as my base dimension, and now notice how it's perfectly in line, and all I have to do is click there, and it's continuing to allow me to place dimensions. So I'm going to click there, and it's actually quite fast. I just basically come along and click all of those corner points, and it's going to create these dimensions perfectly in line. So I'll go ahead and do a couple more of these, and then I'll do maybe this top one here. And notice Fusion was smart enough to say, I can't fit the text inside that little gap, so I'm going to create this little leader out here to the side. However, for example, maybe this 0.14, it kind of overlaps this guy here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that dimension, and we can see we have these 3 little dots. So I'm just going to grab that 0.14 and drag it over a little bit, and we can get something that looks like that. Or I could even come in and drag the points over and get something that looks like this. So you can kind of see how I moved that dimension out of the way. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw another dimension on here. I'll just click on this, this edge, and that gives me my overall height, the 3.287. So the next thing I want to do is to add in these horizontal dimensions. Oops, wrong drawing. Let me back here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom up a little bit, so I'm making sure I'm clicking everything okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and click one edge, and then I'm going to click the other edge. And you can see the third click is going to allow me to place that dimension. So one edge, second edge, and then I can place that dimension. So again, kind of the same idea. I'm just going to click these and place those where I want. And this goes fairly quickly. And this is allowing me to show the thickness when I was creating the revolve. And again, if you haven't watched the other parts of this series where we designed the spark plug and then we did the tooling on the spark plug, we did some collaboration, and then we did the actual manufacturing, at the Technology Center at Pier 9. Okay, there's a really small dimension right here, so I'm going to, and here's another trick. I want to dimension this edge right here. You can kind of see these green squares, but it's really not allowing me to pick on that edge. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit, and now you can see, sure enough, it's letting me catch to that edge. So there might be situations where you're going to want to, zoom in and be able to pick a particular edge. So I'm going to go ahead and say the 0.3, and you'll notice as I'm moving my mouse, it's not letting me move the 0.03 over here yet. So I'm going to go ahead and just place it and then hit my escape key to get out of my dimension. Okay. Now I can select that dimension and drag the text where I want it to go. So I could bring it out here, or I could bring it closer in if I wanted to. I could do something like this. I could bring it over to this other side. It's really up to you. But you basically have to, place the dimension and then say, okay, now I want to move it to here, for example. Okay, a couple more quick dimensions. Let's just go here to here. I'll place that guy. And I think there's one right there, 0.105. And then, again, this last edge. Now, if I zoom up, I can select the edge, and it's going to dimension that particular edge. Or if I get near a corner, you can see how it's snapping to the corner. So I could click once, click again, and that's going to allow me to place my dimension. Okay, so again, it's up to you. It's faster for me to click once and place the dimension than it is to come in and, oops, let me undo here real quick. To me, it's faster to click the edge than it is to go one point and then to the other point. But notice what I get here, okay? And this is kind of why I'm showing this, is I can choose which side I want the dimension on by the order that I pick the points. So let me back up here and show you what I mean. So I'm going to say dimension. I'm going to start here, first point, and then there's my second point, and notice where the text is at. It's over on the right. Okay. If I did the exact opposite and said first point, second point, notice where the text is. So again, little tip there. If you want to really kind of control where that text is going to be, you basically put the text over on the side of your second point. Okay, and then remember, it's a smart dimension, so I'm going to just hover over this curve here, and you can see that it's kind of highlighting it. So I'm going to go ahead and click and move my mouse, but notice it has a diameter symbol, and I want this to be a radius. Well, if I right mouse click, notice I get the radius and diameter option. I get this question quite often. People are like, well, where's the radius dimension versus the diameter dimension? It's not in the pull down. It's actually an option in your right mouse click. So I'm going to change that to radius, and now we can see I get the 0.276. So I'll go ahead and place that and say okay. So I know that was a lot of talking, but hopefully that makes sense. We learned a couple tricks there. We learned about doing the chain dimension so they all stay perfectly lined up. We learned how to use the automatic dimension tool, or the D key, to do linear, angular, and radius and diameter dimensions. And then we also learned by right mouse clicking, you can do the radius or the diameter option. You're going to see me do this as we go through these other views. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. We've just basically finished dimensioning this view right here. So let's go ahead and maybe take a look at some of these other views. For example, this section view right here. Now we can see that that was actually created from this view, and I can see that right here, section A. And then we also section kind of horizontally through it. So let's go ahead and do the section views next. So I'm going to zoom up just a little bit. And again, going kind of from left to right, we learned about base views, we learned about projected views. The next one is section view. Now, as I move my cursor, it says select a parent view. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is my parent view. Now, I want to slice right through the center of this. And I get this question often. Well, I want to draw a center line or something like that. Well, guess what? You don't have to. If you just kind of hover over this line, you'll see that little triangle appear. And that's actually a midpoint. It's finding the middle of that edge. And I can do that on any edge. You can see right here, we're projecting off of that guy. Okay? It's really cool. I can even grab, to radiuses. So this little point here is actually the center of that curved radius. So you don't really have to do a lot of projections and stuff. So I'm going to just go ahead and click up there. And then come down here and you can kind of see it automatically snaps it to vertical. And I could do multiple, like Z bends and stuff like that. But in this case, I'm going to just hit enter. And you'll notice I get this shaded representation. And notice the direction of my section view arrows. Depending on which side I place this view, my arrows are going to flip. So if I place it to the left, we're going to be looking into the part. If I place it to the right, we're kind of looking back into the part. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to place it over here somewhere and say OK. And now we're basically, it's kind of like we removed this whole left side of this view and we're looking at a flat representation of it. And that's what we're seeing right here. You'll notice it labels it, tells it what scale it is, and it creates this nice little hatch pattern. Well, here's another tip for you. If you select that hatch pattern, I think if I can double click on it, I can come in and change what that looks like if I want to. So you can kind of see, you could come in and change to these different standards that we have in here, these different ANSI standards. I could also change the scale factor, let's just say 0.7, and you'll see it makes the lines a little bit closer together. And I can even change, the angle of these lines if I wanted to. So you have the ability to edit any kind of a hatch if you want to. I'm going to undo back. So there we go. Okay. Looks like Aaron's answering a lot of questions. Hopefully this is all making sense for everybody. So thank you, Aaron, again for helping me out on these live streams. Okay, so I want to now create a detail view of this particular area of this view. So that's the next icon over, detail view. And again, it says select the parent view. So I'm going to go ahead and click this view. And then what it's basically asking you, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's asking you to draw a circle that kind of encompasses the detail area. And it's wanting to know kind of the center. So I'm going to start here and then start to move. So you can kind of see I clicked right about there, and then I'm going to start to move, and you can see I'm now able to specify the size of my detail circle. I'm also able to define where I want my detail label to be. So you can kind of see, I can move that around. And you're going to see something really cool here in just a second. So I'm going to do maybe something like this. Okay? And then as soon as I had clicked, I now get this detail view. And it gives us the ability to specify what scale. And it typically does twice the scale. So this was a 2:1. So now it's making my detail 4:1. So I'm just going to go ahead and place that over here and say OK. And this is a detail of this representation. Now here's what I think is really kind of cool. I can come back and I can change the location of this circle. So I could drag this down like so. And notice my view instantly updated. It kind of now has more of that curve to it, for example. I could also change the size of my detail view, and it's going to automatically update. So we give you a lot of flexibility there Let me kind of move this back a little bit, sort of centered. And I can always come in and move that B. So I'll just click on that little B, for example, and move it down. Whoops, it jumped over. But you can drag that and change the location of where the text is supposed to be at. Okay. Okay. On this detail view, I want to add some dimensions. So I'm going to zoom up here a little bit and show another command. So coming over here, you can see we have a center line and then we have a center mark. Center mark is for like circular items and stuff. You can kind of see that from the icon. So I'm going to go ahead and click on center mark. And then I'm just going to get near like this arc right here. And when I click, it's going to create a little center mark for me. So I'm going to go ahead and place those like so. Now, if I had a full circle, which I don't in this case, but like for example, if I came over here, yeah, it's just going to do a little one. But if it was a full circle, it would do the full size center mark like you see kind of in the icon right there. Okay, so now that I have this center mark, I can actually dimension to that. So for example, I hit my D key for dimension, and I want to maybe dimension from this corner here to this point here. And I'll go ahead and place where I want that dimension to be. So let's just say right there. Well, I also want to say how many grooves there are and what the spacing is. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on one, click on the other one, and you can see it says 0.1. So I'm just going to go ahead and maybe place that over here somewhere. Well, I want to say it's 0.1 spacing. So I'm going to double click on this dimension. And you'll notice that it kind of puts the dimension in these brackets, and then you see the flashing I bar. What that means is I can come in here and add more text, right? So notice what it's doing. It's adding that text after the dimension. Now here is a cool tip. If you want to remember anything from today, it's how do I create a second line? Because if I were to hit enter right now, it would just accept my dimension. Well, to add a second line, you'll hold down shift and hit enter. And notice I'm now down in a second line. So again, holding down shift and hitting enter, I can now come in here and say spacing, for example. And I get my dimension. I can move this where I want. Let's just go maybe something up here. And we can see that I was able to add a second line of text. I can add as many lines as I want. I could hit shift enter again, shift enter again, etc., and add as many lines as I want. Okay, so shift enter is how you add in the extra line. Okay, let me throw a couple more dimensions on here. Remember I said it was a smart dimension, so if I get near this circle, I can come up like so. Now I don't want it to be a radius, I want it to be a diameter, so I'm going to right click and say diameter, and now I have this diameter symbol. And then maybe I want to dimension these radiuses. Now again, I'm kind of far away, so it's trying to catch like vertexes or endpoints. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit, and now you can see it's actually catching that curved element there. I want it to be a radius. I'll go ahead and place that. I'll double click on it, shift enter, and say 10 places. And you'll see how that updated accordingly. I can always click on text and grab the little gray box there, and I can move that text around. I can even click on the gray box next to where the arrowhead is and move where that arrow is supposed to be. Okay, so you have some control over that also if you want. Okay, so I've actually dimensioned everything I want over here. I can also move stuff like the section view and the detail view text just by grabbing that gray box and moving it up. Okay. Let's do this section view right here. which is going to give us kind of the slicing through that hex area, because I wanted to show what size hex that was. So we'll do the section view again. So I'll say section view. What's the parent? This is the parent. And then it's asking for where we're going to slice through. And just like before, I can hover over an edge and it's going to project from that edge. So I'm going to go from there over to there. Let's zoom out so you can kind of see what's going to happen here. I'll hit enter. And again, depending on which direction I place this view, it's going to define the direction of that section view. So let's go ahead and put it right there, say OK, and there we go. Now here's another trick, and unfortunately I can't really show it very well because this is a single part, but when you do a section view, right here it says objects to cut. So if this was an assembly, I could actually tell it don't slice through the screws, but definitely slice through the bracket, for example. So you have the ability to define which objects is actually being sectioned right here. Okay, so that's looking good. I'm going to grab this text and move it above. Let's throw a quick dimension. I just have to get near that edge, and there's my dimension. I'll go ahead and double click on this guy and say I want to add, Shift enter. I want to add typical or something like that. So I can add text in there. Okay. The last thing here is this detail view right here. So I'm going to go ahead and create that detail view off this section, and then we're going to do some of these dimensions. And you'll notice that if I zoom up here, some of these dimensions have like degrees symbols next to them. So we're going to learn about that here in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to create another detail view. So I'll come in here and say detail view. What's my parent? This is going to be the parent view. And I'm going to probably maybe just grab near the center of this opener. So I'm going to click there and start to move. And again, I can place this text wherever I want, and I can make the size whatever I want. So let's just go ahead and do that. We'll do the 4:1. I'll go ahead and place that. Say OK. And let's pretend I made a mistake here. I want to edit this view. So I just right click and say edit. And I want it to be 5:1. So we just made that a little bit larger. Okay. So you always have control to be able to go back. I'm going to move my detail text up here, and then I'm going to start creating all of the information here. So maybe I'll throw a center mark on here real quick, like so. Use my dimension command. And I know that from that point there to that point there, again, notice how if I move around, I get different results. I get aligned, horizontal, or vertical. Now here's another tip. If I right mouse click, I can force it to be a particular dimension. So even though I'm doing vertical right now, I could say horizontal, and you'll notice now it's forced to be a horizontal dimension. I'll right mouse click again, I'll say vertical, and now we've forced it to be a vertical dimension. So again, that right mouse click is your friend. It has lots of cool options in there. Okay, so I'm still in my dimension command, so let me do maybe from that point there down to the bottom of this point here. And if I move up a little bit, we can see how it makes it into a vertical dimension. So let's go ahead and place that guy there. And then I'm going to zoom up just a little bit. Maybe I want to dimension this guy, and let's make that a diameter symbol. And you'll see that it adds the diameter symbol for me automatically. If I click on, for example, this line here and this line here, notice that it's doing the angle of 8 degrees for me automatically. And I can extend that down to whatever I want. So let's just go here. Okay. Now I'm actually going to undo, because I want to show another neat little trick. So I'm going to undo that dimension real quick. If we look at this drawing, there's a lot of dimensions going on right here, and this 0.174 is actually referencing a point out here in space because there's a fillet or a curve right here. I want to actually reference this point out in space. Now, how do we do that? So I'm going to zoom up here so you can kind of see, and right here is edge extension. So I'm going to go ahead and click on edge extension. Let's zoom up so you can really see what's going on here. I'm going to click on this edge here, and then I'm going to click on this edge here, and watch what it does. It actually extends those edges, and I now have a point that I can dimension to. So for example, if I just get near, let me zoom up, get near that, you can see how it's snapping to that point. I can grab this vertical edge here. It's snapping to that vertical edge, and now I can put this dimension where I want, like so. So we're basically dimensioning if this were a sharp point. So that's the edge extension command. Okay. So I see somebody asked a question about adding like a tolerance or whatever. Yes, I'm going to show how you can add symbols, special characters, tolerancing, GD&T symbols, all that kind of stuff here in just a moment. So I'm going to continue dimensioning this. And again, I just think it's so cool how fast this is. I just click a line, I click another line like this guy here, and it automatically turns it into an angle dimension. I'm not having to come in here and say, okay, I want to do an angle dimension. I want to do a linear dimension or whatever. I'm just in the same command, and it's allowing me to, for example, click that edge there, click that edge there, and I can say I want that to be 0.06. And then let's go ahead and add in that 0.8, or that, I'm sorry, that 8 degrees again. And what else? We have to define an angle here. So I'm going to zoom up, grab that line, and notice it's giving me the complementary. So that's 45. If I move over here, I get 135, etc. So I'm going to do 135, and let's just go ahead and place that right about there. Now you'll notice, unfortunately, my angle dimension goes right through my 135. So check this out. I can come in here under dimension. I can say dimension break. I'll go ahead and click on this 8 and say OK, and it automatically breaks. And notice it even broke it through these other extension lines for me. And even if I were to come in and move this text, let's move down there, it's going to keep that break for me. It's really kind of slick. So let's just move that back like so. Okay. I can also do that if I just look, for example, select a dimension, right mouse click, add dimension break. So I don't even have to go to the menu to do that. Okay. So I think we have most of the dimensions there. Now this 0.174 is right here. Maybe I want to move that to the right. So you can kind of see I'm just dragging the 0.174, and I'm able to drag that over to the right. So you can always reposition these dimensions after you've placed them. I can even move where the text is, in that dimension break extension line. Okay. Okay, let's pick on this 0.174 to answer the question before I forget. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. And again, we see these brackets. And this is basically the dimension that was created from the 3D model. Now, again, I have control over what's the precision. Let's go to 4 decimal places or 2 decimal places. You can kind of see, in this case, it's going higher doesn't do anything because there's no dimensions after that, or no decimal places after that. I could do alternate units, so I could display it in English and metric units. which is kind of cool. Okay. I can also insert symbols. So if I click on this little down arrow here, you can see all the different kinds of symbols. So I could say, for example, depth, and it creates that symbol for me. I could do degrees, and it's going to create little degrees symbol for me. So you can see all of the different symbols that we have in there. Okay. I'm going to undo back. Then we have tolerance. So you can see right now it's set to none. So you can see we can do symmetrical, deviation, or limit. And so if I do the symmetrical, we can see the plus or minus, and I can specify what that tolerance is supposed to be. Okay. Or I could say deviation, and I have control over this. Okay. So you can kind of see that example. And then finally, limit. So, and again, it's changing the dimension per what my tolerances are right here. So lots of different options there. So that's how, and hopefully that answers the question that somebody asked earlier. I couldn't see who it was, but I know Aaron was answering for me there. We also have different representations. So is it a reference dimension? So it's going to put parentheses after it. Is it not to scale? It's going to underline it. So I could type in, 0.5 for this dimension, which is obviously way off, but we want to tag that was, not to scale, or it was a reference dimension. So you can kind of see all the options you have there. And then we also have inspection. So round, angular, or no frame. So I could put a round on there, and it's going to put that round balloon. So yeah, great questions. Thanks for asking that. That's kind of the tolerance. I also mentioned we have symbols. So we have surface textures, we have control frames, and we have datums. So for example, I could do a datum identifier. So I'll just come down here like so, and say that's my datum A. Now, again, don't bark at me because I'm doing weird stuff with GD&T, but you can come in here and change that. You could reference that datum. I could do a control feature frames. So let's just go ahead and I'll just pick on something else here. Let's just do maybe that edge. And I could place this control data frame wherever I want. And then it gives me all of the different kinds of options, flatness, profile, etc., concentricity, and you can fill out all these different tolerances, and you can do all the different kinds of symbols, etc. So, again, I'm just making stuff up here. Let's just go 0.005. What's my second tolerance? 0.008 or something like that. So you can kind of see. We can reference different datums if we wanted to, etc., etc. So, and you can do multiple frames if you wanted to, build a second frame. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail. I just wanted to show that you can do that. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show was, let me zoom out here, how I went about doing some of these interesting little leader lines, some of the symbols and chamfers, etc. So I'm going to do those, and that's pretty much the end of the drawing. So let me go ahead and zoom up here, and I'm going to create a text with leader. So you can kind of see this A with a leader. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that guy. And I might pick this, let's just do I'll do this guy. And again, I want to make sure I'm zoomed up enough that I'm making sure I'm grabbing the right edge. So I'm going to grab that edge there and just maybe place the text over here. And I'm going to say 0.02 by 45. Now I want to put a degrees symbol. So I'm just going to click on symbols, degrees. Now I also want to say chamfer on a separate line. So I'm going to say Shift, Enter, and now I can say chamfer. Now I like to have the text capital, so I'm going to hit my caps locks and say chamfer and close that guy out. And I now have this text. And I can move this around. You can kind of see how the leader kind of moves with it. So let's just go ahead, I'll just place it there, for example. Well, I also want to point to a chamfer down here and a chamfer up here. So I'm going to use the exact same command. So I'll select that edge, and you can see how it's creating this leader for me. And then all I have to do is get near this tail. And I'm just going to go ahead and click. Now it's asking for text. Well, I'm not going to type anything in. I just wanted the leader. So I'll do the same thing here. I'll click there, kind of move up, and close. And now I have this text basically pointing to 3 separate edges. Okay, so again, same thing over here. I might point to this edge here. I'll go ahead and place it, and this is, I think, the 0.03 by 45 degrees. Shift Enter. Type in chamfer, and you have different options here. You can make it centered, left justified, right justified, etc. I usually do left justified. I think it looks really nice. And then I will go ahead and place that second leader with no text. So that's how I went about doing that. Okay. We're kind of right at the top of the hour. The only view I didn't do is this view right here, which I'll go ahead and show real quick. And that's pretty much the end of this. So I want to create a representation of this. And I want to make sure that I'm looking at the opener part. So we're basically looking into this direction. So let's go ahead and do another base view. Okay, and it's asking me to place this view. Well, I want to look at the right view. So I'm going to come in here and say, well, instead of the front, let's take a look at the right. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and place that view where I want. Let's just say right there. I'll say OK, and it's going to update that, but you'll notice we're not seeing the correct view. And the reason is because I purposely made a mistake here to show you how we can edit this. We're actually looking at it in the wrong direction. We're looking at it from the right to the left. So just as simple as editing the view, and instead of right, let's change it to left. And notice we now see the representation of that. Okay, and so we're now looking in the correct direction. I could add my leaders here, etc., etc. So I'll just say 0.03 by 45. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now, just to kind of speed things up, because I want to show another cool little trick here. So you saw that I was able to change the direction of the view. Now with this isometric view, if I come in here, you'll see that that's the, I want to be able to change, I guess it's the projection. Let's see. Yeah, no, okay, I'm going to show a different method here. I'm going to jump back to my bottle opener, and I'm going to make a change to my design. Okay, so let's say we chamfer this top edge. So I'm going to say chamfer, and let's just do a pretty small chamfer here, 0.015. And then I'm going to save this. And I'll just say added small chamfer. Small chamfer. Watch what happens when I go into my drawing. Okay, so we're going to see this go from version 7 to version 8. Now I'm going to come over to my drawing, and you'll see I get a warning. Changes have been made to a reference design. You can update the drawing from the button in the application bar. And you'll notice that same little symbol right here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom up a little bit so we can kind of see what's going on here. But watch what happens. I'll go ahead and click on that icon, and it's going to go through and actually update all of these views to make sure that it's now correct. Now it didn't do this one because this is my sketch, but you'll see that it updated, you know, all of these projected views, the detail views, the section views, and everything. So you can create your drawing at any time in your design process and then make changes to your 3D model and update the drawing accordingly. Okay, and then the other thing that I think is really cool, let me jump back over here, is maybe I want to create a representation of a view that isn't isometric, it isn't a projection, it's kind of something like, let's just say something kind of like this. I want to show this representation. Well, I don't have that option in my drawing. Well, what you do is you come over here to named views, and you'll recognize some of these: top, front, right, and home. I'm going to right mouse click and say new named view. And I can give it a name. I'll call this Brad ISO because I'm unoriginal. So I just called it Brad ISO. And let's go ahead and save that. Okay. And what that's going to allow me to do is when I come into my drawing here, it says changes have been made. So let's go ahead and update that. I want to create a representation. So I'm going to say base view. Now watch this orientation. Top, front, right, home, and Brad ISO. And when I do that, I now have that particular direction, that particular angle that I created. So I'm going to say OK, and there's that representation. So I think this is really slick. You're not limited to just the 45-degree isometrics and stuff like that. I can make this shaded, I can do my tangent edges if I wanted to, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you found that useful. So all you have to do is create a custom named view. You can do multiple named views, different angles and stuff like that, and bring those in as projections into your drawing. So with that, I hope you found this useful, that we showed you that you can actually create some pretty cool drawings inside of Fusion 360, and hope to see you on a future live stream. Again, make sure you thumbs up, thumbs down, add comments, what you want to see on future live streams. Aaron's actively reading all of these and telling me, do something on this, do something on that. So with that, if you haven't watched the previous 4 of this series, definitely watch it. We covered a lot of material. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. It was a blast doing this. So we hope to do more things like this in the future, maybe with like sheet metal, maybe with generative design, maybe with simulation. Let us know what you'd like to see. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you on a future live stream. Thank you.